Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Salovey. I'm the 23rd president of Yale University. Welcome to this historic moment for Yale. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have the honor of introducing a very distinguished visitor to our campus, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Your Excellency, thank you. Thank you for coming to Yale. And I note that this is your third such visit, and each time you have inspired our community with your wise perspective. And thank you most especially for the United Nations and your personal deep care for the preservation of cultural heritage and sponsorship of this important colloquium. When we embarked on our planning for the events of this week, for the UN Global Colloquium of University Presidents itself, which will take place tomorrow, and for the wider program of activities that are taking place, including this public lecture, the response from the Yale community was one of immediate and resonant enthusiasm. For our faculty and our students and our employees and community members across New Haven, the topic at hand struck a vibrant chord. Preservation of cultural heritage, challenges, and strategies. For us at Yale, hosting this year's Global Colloquium, there could be no question that this would be our subject of focus. Why? Well, because quite simply, heritage matters. It is the record, both concrete and intangible, of human identity. When our heritage is destroyed by war or by weather, from malice or from neglect, it is a loss that in many cases can never be remedied. So we at Yale are delighted to have the support and cooperation of the United Nations and the collaboration of so many individuals across our own campus and from institutions around the world in seeking to protect, preserve, and promote our shared cultural heritage. As I said earlier, this week's colloquium and surrounding events have met with an overwhelming response from our community. You here in this room today are a testament to the importance and the resonance of our work together. More than 150 faculty members and other experts across the university, from widely varied backgrounds and diverse fields of study and practice, are contributing not only to this week's programs, but to ongoing preservation and conservation efforts. I hope that many of you took advantage of yesterday's open house at Yale's West Campus to see the work taking place at the Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage. If you missed it, there's another open house on Friday, and too many other events to name, but you can read all about them at UNGC, UN Global Colloquium, ungc.yale.edu. Secretary General Ban, during your last visit to Yale in 2012, you spoke so eloquently of the need for collective action to confront the world's greatest challenges. You called upon us to seek alliances among nations, among institutions, to share the responsibility for protecting our world. We heard you that day, and we felt the same sense of urgency that you expressed. And I'm very proud to say that the work you see taking place at Yale today, and with institutional partners around the globe, is a manifestation of that belief. Your Excellency, you have inspired us with your leadership of the United Nations. You have made important strides toward peace. You've reached out to nations in crisis. You've worked diligently to promote the rights of women, to protect the environment, and to strengthen the United Nations and make it more effective for generations to come. Thank you so much for your leadership in confronting climate change and fostering sustainability issues on which Yale shares your deep commitment. You have brought the nations of the world together, achieved concerted and concrete action with the tremendous success of COP21 in Paris as a sign of real hope. You've also done so much to encourage young people to participate in civic life, leading by example as you have engaged with youth, listened to them, and helped them to find their voices on the world stage. At Yale, as educators and as committed global citizens, we're delighted to have the United Nations as a partner in supporting the next generation of citizen leaders. When it comes to conserving and preserving cultural heritage and shared history, we at Yale like to say the future of the past is in our hands, in all of our hands, and in the hands of every individual around the world. Mr. Secretary General, right here and right now, we are in your hands. We are eager to have your insights, to learn from your perspective, and to go forth from today, inspired to do even more to contribute to the vital work that lies ahead. Thank you for being with us today, and everyone, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
Thank you. Distinguished President Peter Salovey of Yale University, distinguished presidents of universities around the world, honorable members of the academic communities, distinguished faculties, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor and pleasure for me to visit the Yale University again for third time as a Secretary General and take part in the United Nations Global Colloquium. I'm inspired to be among some of the most distinguished academics in the world and to connect your groundbreaking research with the global diplomacy of the United Nations. I was energized and inspired by our previous meetings, which covered maternal health, empowering young people, and harnessing new technologies to meet global challenges. I'm particularly happy to see so many young students are here today who will be surely the leaders of tomorrow, but most of them have already taken the leadership of today. It's important that for this colloquium to discuss about how the teachers and professors can provide good and sustainable opportunities, social, political, and economic opportunities for young people. Ladies and gentlemen, standing here as a Secretary General, I'm just thinking of what will happen after me. As you may know or may not know, from today, the selection process of my successor has begun at the United Nations. This is going to be a very different selection process. I'm very happy that there is going to be a change in the United Nations system. This is a huge change. When I was elected as the Secretary General in 2006, I was one of the many candidates. Jokingly, I've been saying that, well, you know, I'm the first democratically elected Secretary General. Why? Before me, there was no such Secretary General. 7 Secretaries Generals who were elected through campaign. I was the only one, at that time, 7 candidates who have been campaigning. In fact, I'm very happy to see former President of Mexico, Zedillo, sitting here. He was, you may remember, I'll tell you all the secrets. When I was a candidate, I was invited by Davos Forum, World Economic Forum. There were several candidates. That was the first time that I was having sort of an interview in front of maybe 1,000 people. President Zedillo was moderator. He was giving hard questions. I'd like to thank very much for his vision. Then he might have thought that I could be some possible candidate or Secretary General. I think his question was a little bit softer than other people, other candidates. Thank you for that. But for me, every question was a difficult one. Today, this campaign has really begun. In the General Assembly Hall, all 193 member states, together with NGO representatives, they were questioning the candidates. We have 4 women, 4 men candidates, and this number of candidates will be surely increasing. In any way, this is a very good way to change this world in a more transparent, more competitive, more accountable way. I was one of them. I think myself, I was elected through that, but this process will be much, much more competitive and much more transparent one. That's good for the future of the United Nations. Let's hope for the best, and if possible, let us hope that the best candidate could be a woman candidate from next year. All what I said is off the record today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm particularly honored to be here, and it is appropriate that we are discussing here at Yale, where this destruction of cultural treasures on a vast scale over recent years make this a theme of this colloquium even more timely and relevant. It's appropriate that we discuss this here at Yale, where the world-famous Beinecke Library and the Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage have done so much to raise awareness of culture in crisis. President Salovey, I know you have taken this important course far beyond Yale, including to the World Economic Forum at Davos this year, where you devoted Yale's annual event to discussing ancient artifacts from Babylon and Palmyra. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to thank you and to express our great admiration for your commitment to humanity. Many distinguished speakers are here to share their experience on preserving cultural heritage. As a Secretary General, I have been visiting many historical places where I saw so many precious, timeless, valuable heritages. Each time, whenever I wrote the guest book, I've been always saying that I'm very much impressed, inspired by what I have seen today here. But these are common assets of humanity. These should be preserved for coming generations so that they will be inspired. This has been my standard writing all the times. Today, I'd like to put the preservation of culture into a geopolitical context to show why we at the United Nations believe it is essential to our mission of peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. Distinguished university presidents, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, art, literature, music, poetry, architecture, these are the hallmarks of our human existence. They form a common thread that unites all civilizations and cultures, a celebration of our emotional lives and the beauty of our national environment. Our cultural heritage defines our humanity. Cultural diversity, like biodiversity, plays a quantifiable and crucial part in the health of human species. An attack on cultural heritage in one part of the world is an attack on us all, on all of us humanity. But cultural diversity is under grave threat around the globe. This is very sad at this time. Who could fail to be outraged by the destruction of the magnificent Buddhas of Bamiyan, the monument of Palmyra, the mosques and cultural artifacts in northern Mali? This wanton vandalism and destruction is not collateral damage. It's a part of a ruthless wave of cultural and ethnic cleansing, inseparable from the persecution of the communities that created these cultural gems. It's also part of a cycle of theft and profit that finances the activities of extremists and terrorists. As a human family, we cannot let them erase our history and identity. Any loss of cultural heritage is a loss of our common memory. It impairs our ability to learn, to build the experience, and to apply the lessons of the past to the present and the future. Culture is also one of the strongest driving forces for building societies and imbuing them with values. It knits communities together with a sense of community. Extremists and terrorists have known this throughout the ages. They have always understood that by attacking and destroying cultural artifacts, buildings and monuments, they can divide the people. They can erase their common values, shred the social fabric, and create greater fragility and vulnerability to their cynical ideology. In our response, we must even be more determined to safeguard and preserve culture than the extremists are to destroy it. This must be central to our strategy for tackling violent extremism and building peace and restoring security. The United Nations system is working to strengthen the links between protection of cultural heritage, peace-building missions, and humanitarian emergency response. Last Friday, in Geneva, I have convened an international conference at ministerial level to talk about my plan of action to prevent the violent extremism. There were 700 people from 120 countries all participated. This was warmly welcomed by the United Nations General Assembly in February. And I am in the process of implementing and executing all these plan of action so that we will be able to, first of all, prevent this violent extremism. It's important that we fight back and defeat terrorism, extremism. At the same time, it's much more important to prevent before these things happen. Once a terrorist actions happens, it's cruel and brutal, and it's very tragic. But if we can prevent those extremism and terrorism from taking place, I think that's the way we can save our human lives and our cultural artifacts. That's a very important point, priority for the United Nations at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, I visited Mali. For example, in Mali, I saw the destruction caused by extremist militants to mausoleums and manuscripts when they took over Timbuktu in 2012. I visited Mali immediately after that. It was not only about stones, buildings, and papers. It was about identity and human dignity. I will never forget speaking to the Grand Imam, representatives from the Christian community, the local government, young people, and women's representatives. They all said they had lived together in a diverse community for 1,000 years. They all wanted education, jobs, and above all, peace. As soon as Timbuktu was liberated, UNESCO and the Malian government launched a restoration operation with logistical support from the blue helmets of our United Nations peacekeeping missions. Like destruction, restoration is not only about buildings, it is about history, about identity, and about culture and the promise of the future for our succeeding generations. I'm proud to say that 14 mausoleums have now been completely restored. The townspeople talk about the rebirth of Timbuktu. UNESCO stands ready to travel to Palmyra, which was liberated just weeks ago, to help evaluate the damage and protect the city's priceless cultural heritage. I hope that one day, Palmyra, Aleppo, Nineveh, and the other devastated cities of Syria and Iraq will again serve as symbols of unity and diversity. The United Nations Security Council has recognized the important links between cultural heritage, peace, and security in a landmark resolution passed last year. The Security Council condemned the destruction of cultural heritage in Iraq and in Syria, and adopted legally binding measures to combat the illicit trafficking of antiquities and cultural artifacts from these countries. This was a rare show of unity from the Security Council, which had been in a deadlock over Syrian issues. Now, we must build on these major steps to advance the cause of peace. Distinguished Presidents, students, ladies and gentlemen, another kind of culture erupts periodically in some societies around the cultural touchstones, identities, and beliefs. Attempts to persuade can sometimes cross a line into attempts to shut down differing opinions. University campuses are often at the center of very heated debate. Here too, diverse cultures and opinions are signs of flourishing community. Universities need to be places where we can listen to each other and each other's ideas in peace. There is nothing more important than preserving respect for dialogue, debate, and yes, disagreement. When this respect is lost, deeper damage can be done. This is the place where professors teach young generation. Young generation will someday will become professors and leaders of the society. This is where people learn and practice. I've been speaking to world leaders. Whenever and wherever there are problems, and there are many countries where fires are burning, where people are fighting against their leaders. I've been speaking to these leaders. Please listen very carefully, attentively, what your people are saying, what their aspirations and challenges are. But sometimes they do not listen to the voices. That's the beginning of the problems of the country, beginning of the world, problem of the world. Now, in such esteemed educational institutions like Yale universities and where you represent around the world, these universities should be the places to teach your students how they can listen each other while exchanging their views. They need to listen to each other's views. That's the basic to mutually understand each other. And then when they become leaders of the society, whether educational, political, social, economic, I think they have capacity, they have willingness to listen to each other. I know university presidents are keenly aware of your responsibility to foster such public dialogue. I congratulate you on your success in staying at the forefront of intellectual challenge and change. In the internet age, universities need passionate debate on campus and to remain relevant. I hope the young men and women here will bring that passion with you into the world beyond your studies. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is at a critical juncture. We need the energy and idealism of young people to tackle major threats to human well-being. This world's global population, the half of them is under the age of 25. That means this world is very young. But have we done enough attention, enough education, enough for their job opportunities? No, I don't think so. That's the beginning of all these problems which we have. Therefore, these universities must be the place where you really educate the good quality, and it's now political leaders, economic leaders, community leaders, that they should employ and empower these young people. That's what I'm really going to discuss with you. And another important issue is how we can address climate change. It's not visible, but it's impacting surely whole the spectrums of our life. Climate change is an intergenerational injustice. Thank you very much for that. Divestment, universities, when will you? I think I know that your university has already begun divestment. I am very much grateful for your leading by example, and I highly applaud President Salovey for his vision. Now, I can tell you that low carbon economy is inevitable. It's already happening, and it must be. It must be. It's inevitable. Even in some of the wealthiest countries, nearly half of young adults are unemployed. Conflict is creating the highest number of displaced people since the Second World War. Half of them are children. Some 600 million young people live in countries that are fragile or war-torn. The United Nations is responding to these problems, but we need the engagement of young men and women to multiply our efforts. All world leaders agreed last September on the ambitious new 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, which aim to end, first of all, abject poverty by 2030, prevent diseases, prevent those people who would otherwise die from preventable diseases, and empower women by 2030. Our target of the United Nations is to make this world 50-50 planet Earth, where men and women will have an equal standing in every aspect of our life. This agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDGs instead of MDGs, have 17 goals, which include clear targets for education, gender equality, and decent work for all. We are now in the first year of implementation. I hope young men and women will hold governments accountable for their promises and help to achieve them. And universities and professors should also be part of this. Now, first ever World Humanitarian Summit meeting will be held in Istanbul next month. This will consider root causes of conflict and displacement, how we can better protect civilians, and how we can meet the needs of unprecedented numbers of people who are moving from here, there, from conflict zone to the better places. The United Nations will hold the summit in September to discuss this matter. I know that many European leaders are struggling to handle this matter, but it's not the European matters only. There's a human tendency that when there is a conflict, then people have to flee to protect their own lives. There's a human tendency that people are moving from one place to another for better opportunities. It happened since millennia, many thousand years ago. People were constantly moving to other better places. Again, this is a very important issue at this time. There are climate change, sustainable development goals, how we can address this humanitarian crisis all around the world. Can you believe that there are more than 60 million people around the world who need immediate assistance, life-saving humanitarian assistance around the world? This is the most number since the end of Second World War. Last December, again, the United Nations is making a lot of landmark decisions. When I was talking about this importance of youth, for the first time in the history of the United Nations, I appointed a special envoy on youth. It's a young man, but he's now liaising and networking all around the world with a youth group, and even Security Council has adopted a landmark resolution on youth issues. The important significance of the Security Council resolution is that normally, according to Charter of the United Nations, Security Council has a primary responsibility to deal with international peace and security. Then many people believe that women issue is nothing to do with the peace and security. Youth issue has nothing to do with the peace and security. But Security Council has recognized already 11 years ago by adopting landmark resolution, which is open quoted 1325. This is women, peace and security. United Nations recognized that already lack of gender empowerment has implications to peace and security of the world. Now, December last year, they recognized that youth issue can have a direct implication to international peace and security. Now, United Nations is now addressing comprehensively all the issues. Far too long, young people have been considered good enough to fight wars only, but not to make peace. This is our commitment, United Nations commitment to address these issues. Finally, I hope young people like yourselves, I think you should lead this campaign to make this world sustainable, more sustainable environmentally by addressing climate action. Yale sent, I know that, 100 student experts to Paris last year when there was a summit meeting to support hard-won climate change agreement. I commend Yale for being the first university to join the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. I have been urging pension funds, insurance companies, and major companies, business companies, to start decarbonizing their portfolios and shifting towards greener investment. And student movement and action like a divestment from fossil to clean energy, that's what we expect. The universities and educational institutions, and particularly our young leaders, should lead this campaign. Yale has shown great leadership in this area, and I commend your initiatives. Shareholders are calling on companies, they invest into disclose climate risk. A growing number of corporations are speaking up in favor of carbon pricing. I encourage Yale to be an even bigger part of the transition to a safer, healthier, low-carbon future. The path to prosperity is clear, and we should all do what we can to put the world on more sustainable footing. I was very much grateful while walking to this auditorium. President Salovey explained how Yale University is trying to make carbon, low carbon management of this. And I thank you very much. You're leading by example. I'm encouraged by the strong political momentum from more than 130 countries that have confirmed their intention to sign this Paris Agreement on 22nd of this month. Distinguished President, dear young students, ladies and gentlemen, there is a Syrian saying, I quote, "Without the old, there is nothing new. Without the historical context, we cannot make sense of our world or build a common future." Universities have a critical role in preserving and sharing knowledge and instilling respect for cultural heritage and diversity. You are training the next generation of cultural curators and leaders. Academics of all disciplines know that without open debate, research stagnates and progress slows to a standstill. Above all, you understand the critical link between culture and human development. I urge you to lead a global movement to promote our diverse cultural heritage for future generations. Engage your colleagues, your friends, your students, and your teachers. Preserving the world's priceless cultural heritage is a task for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, let us work together to make this world better for all the people around the world. I thank you for your attention. Thank you for your engagement and leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary General. Secretary General has agreed to take some questions, and I was handed on my way in a stack of 3x5 cards, which I presume you all filled out earlier this afternoon. Um, and I'll just take them in the order in which I received them. So this is a question about Palmyra, talking about how much of it was destroyed during the occupation of the Islamic State. And there's two questions here. One which you addressed in your talk. The first question is, what is the role of the international community in helping to rebuild sites like Palmyra, which you did speak a bit about. But the other question, maybe you could elaborate upon, which is, what really can universities do to help with a situation like that?
I think most of you must have read newspapers. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. One very brave reporter visited Palmyra, the destruction site. I was appalled to see all this complete destruction of 1,000-year-old our cultural heritages. UNESCO and United Nations, when the situation improves through political negotiation, when the security allows us, that we will immediately begin to restore as much as we can this priceless, valuable artifact. That's one commitment which was already announced by Director General of UNESCO a few weeks ago. We will do that. Then, for that possible, the Syrian people should have peace in their homes, home country. That's why from tomorrow, the negotiation is going to resume in Geneva with my special envoy for Syria chairing. We've been trying to make a political space as much as possible, and through 2 meetings, we've been trying to find out some commonalities, common elements between 2 warring parties. We have found at least 12 common elements. One of 12 common elements includes the reconstruction of Syria. When there is all the agreements are done, we can see relative peace and security so that all these experts can enter and engage in reconstruction, socio-economic reconstruction, and restoration of cultural heritages. Universities, you have a very important role. You have produced many important political leaders, business community leaders. I think this is the place where presidents and prime ministers and business CEOs and educators, they are all educated here. So you are the teachers of all the leaders around the world. I think you have a lot of reach and influence, and use your influence as teachers of those political leaders and business CEOs. There is nothing which one country can do. I think all the hands should be on the deck. But academic institutions, that's the place where we can expect the most influence and teaching for those people. That's why I'm here. I'm here to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a question about that moves from the Middle East and says, what other areas of the world where we should be concerned about, what are the other areas of the world where we should be concerned about preserving cultural heritage in the future, and what could the international community do now in advance of conflict to build local capacity for such preservation?
I just introduced my experience in Timbuktu, northern Mali, a few years ago, when this area was occupied by all these extremists and destroyed. Fortunately, we were able, with the United Nations peacekeeping missions we were able to liberate Timbuktu, and we, as I said, UNESCO has restored all 16 mausoleums. That's one good thing. It's not only in Mali. We have at least 10 big fires burning places, including Syria, Mali, Somalia, Libya, South Sudan, Central African Republic. Unfortunately, these are all happening in Africa. Yemen, even though in Yemen, since yesterday, the cessation of hostilities have begun. But it's a very fragile situations are continuing. Under these circumstances, when it comes to human being, it's women and girls, a vulnerable group of people who have been targeted, who have been abused their human rights. It's now, when it comes to something, then these historical artifacts, they have become easy targets to erase identity of a certain religion. This is a totally unacceptable situation. Therefore, first of all, priority is that we should have a peace restored. And we have to work together. How we can make sure that each and every respects the other's tradition, the other's history, the other's culture. When my religion, my culture is important, the same should be applied to other people who believes other religions. Then their religions, their culture, tradition should also be respected. That's why United Nations has launched this Alliance of Civilization. This is a big initiative, but still, it has not been fully able to address this issue. It's very sad. We are living in a very difficult era. At the same time, as I said, it's not only perils or challenges. World leaders have given some strong sense of hope through Agenda for Sustainable Development, Targeting 2030, and Climate Change Agreement. These two are, I think, a most encouraging achievement that the United Nations and international community have achieved and presented in recent years. And therefore, while we address these crisis issues, we have to pay more attention and priority on development and climate change issues. By doing that, we can significantly reduce the sources of conflict. That's my belief, yes.
Maybe we should turn to sustainability and climate change. Pick up on a couple of themes in from your talk. This is a question essentially saying, what are the next steps following COP21 in Paris? And do we need a different approach in the developed and in the developing world?
COP21 it's not the end, or it's not the beginning. We may say it was a good beginning, but turning point, very significant turning point. As you may know, you've been following that the negotiation on climate change has been very slow. It took decades. That's why I've been very emphatically, emotionally stating that negotiation has been moving at snail's pace. That has been many times quoted by media. It has been moving even slower than snails. Last year, and since 2014, I have been pushing and accelerating this pace. And during my time as a Secretary General, during the last 10 years, I have convened at least 3 times special summit meeting on climate change and my convening power. And 2014, the last meeting before we went to Paris, that was the most turning point. Most of the world leaders came, and there was huge show of solidarity by the people. In New York, in Manhattan, there were 400,000 people marched, calling for action. And it was not only in Manhattan, all throughout the world. That was a turning point. I am very happy that in COP21, this Paris Agreement was adopted by unanimity. It's dramatic and amazing that out of 196 countries, even one country objects, there could not have been any agreement. But all 196 countries agreed because they know that without taking action now, it will be too late, we'll be abandoning the moral and political duties of this world. I'm very happy, but this is not the end. We have to build upon this one. All this agreement should be implemented without fail. And that's why one good thing is that we have introduced a monitoring and verifying mechanisms. Every 5 years, there will be a monitoring and verification process. It will start from 2018. So first review session will be held 3 years after. From then on, every 5 years. Then we expect the parties, member states, would raise their level of ambition. This ambition level at this time is low. While we agreed to contain the global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade, but if we continue like this way, then we may end up at least 3 degrees. Then it will be a tragic situation. So we have to do even lower than 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. I think we can do it with the transformative technology development and with the low carbon economy, with the sustainable energy deployed. I think we can do it. And therefore, I've been asking major business community leaders to divest in fossil fuel industries to sustainable energy, solar energy, wind power, and all these water hydro powers. These are the answers, and it is inevitable, and it is already taking place. And I'm sure that we will be able to make it. Yeah.
Great. If I could combine two questions that came in, really about Yale's policies toward becoming more sustainable, greener campus. You mentioned that Yale was the first university to join the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which the World Bank and the IMF launched in Paris. And we want to be a laboratory for carbon pricing, whether it works to change behavior, and what are the political constraints and issues that need to be resolved in order to implement it beyond a university. We've started here, and so the first question is, do you think experiments of this kind are useful? You did comment on it a little bit. The other one relates to the issue that some of our students care quite passionately about, and we're here making that view apparent, and that concerns divestment from investments in companies engaged in extraction or sale of fossil fuels. Our chief investment officer has carved out a strategy that I believe he may be the only one doing. What he did is he wrote to all of Yale's fund managers a letter, and our endowment is essentially managed externally by fund managers, and he encouraged them to consider the risks of climate change in their investment decisions. And he's about to announce the results of this letter. I believe there's actually going to be an article in the New York Times tomorrow about this, maybe already online. And what he says is that the results have been significant in both in terms of selling past investments and refraining from some new ones. So this is kind of an economic-based approach. Rather than wholesale divestment, it sort of approaches it over time as an investment decision over time. So the question is whether you think this is a useful way to move the global economy toward greater use of clean energy technology.
My answer is, of course, definitely is very commendable, very good initiative. And normally, one may think that climate change or sustainable development, that's what government leaders do, or that's what business communities will have to do. But universities and educational institutions are no exception. In that regard, I'm so happy to hear that Yale University is really leading by example. When you teach, you have to lead, you have to practice. What my role sometimes as a Secretary General is a lot of preaching. When you just preach, and if you don't do it, it's not fair. You have to do as you preach. You have to do as you teach. This is what you are showing. And I believe that what your chief financial officer has been doing with all these business communities dealing with your universities, I think that's a fantastic idea. And this may sound a small initiative. I hope that the presence of who are participating here should emulate. And when you return, your university should also do exactly what Yale University is doing. At the same time, I appreciate some of the students who stood up with the banners. When you implement this climate change and sustainable development goals, and sometimes you need activism. We normally think that activism is for what NGOs or civil societies. And business CEOs, government officials are always defensive. They always try to say something, then defensive. It's only the civil society and NGOs who really provoke and challenge and motivate government officials and business communities. I really appreciate your activism. I'm asking young students, you may even challenge your professors. You may challenge your congressmen, senators, and president. You have that prerogative because you have fresh ideas and creative ideas. Then, most of all, this is the world where you will have to live. My term ends December this year, so I'll become just a normal citizen. And professors, one day president, one day you may retire, then that's your place. It will be your place. And therefore, you have a legitimate right to challenge your community and leaders. Then look, professor, senators, Mr. President, this is my world. This is the place where I will have to live. My children will have to live. Please make this world sustainable, economically, socially.
As a final question, one that's a little bit more self-reflective, and that is about you. January, as you said, will mark 10 years as UN Secretary General and the completion of your second term. And this question asks, what leadership lessons have you learned in this 10 years? And in particular, what are the challenges for the UN of the future? And are there any leadership lessons that our students can take away from your experience at the UN?
That's a little broad question, which is very difficult. I think the leadership, when you talk about leadership, I don't think there is any clear-cut definition of a leadership. That should be different from where, what kind of profession, where you are placed in. But my leadership as a Secretary General or senior public service servant should always be listening to the voices of the people. Then what can I do for them? What they are really thinking, what are their aspirations are, what are their concerns and challenges are. This is what I have been doing. Then often I've been saying that I'm a defender of defenseless people. I'm a voice of voiceless people. There are many people. You will be surprised to know that there are many voiceless people, many vulnerable group of people who are completely defenseless, and when their human rights and human dignity are just ruthlessly abused, then I've been speaking out for them. This is one aspect of leadership. But when you lead your long life, 70 years or 80 years, I often say that the highest virtue of a human being is to act like water. This is what I talked to President Obama, and one day I wrote some calligraphy and gave this to President Obama. Mr. President, I think your leadership looks like water. Water, I believe in, and I hope if anybody agrees with my points, please try to practice. But it's not easy. It's not easy. Water seems to be just powerless, weakest, no power, nothing. But water is very powerful when it definitely has to be. There are many important elements in our world. There are some fiery people, very dynamic leadership, who speaks fiery and very eloquently. But do they really practice? Do they really know how to make a compromise and some flexibility? This is what I have seen among so many leaders. They are seemingly very dynamic, but do not know how to make some harmonious decision, harmonious conclusion of a debate. If you just insist your views, suppose you may be right, but that's not the end. You cannot be 100% right all the times. There is always some good point to listen to others' views and make the others' views as yours and combine it, make it harmonious. When I believe in this theory of water, the highest virtue is to act like water. You don't need to always to confront. When there is something hazard, then you may avoid all this. Unnecessary, you don't need to confront all the times. But when it is absolutely necessary, you can push. You can really push hard. This is what we see from water. Water doesn't have color. Water doesn't have any order. Water seemingly doesn't have any power. But in the end, it can win over anything. Can fire win over water? Everybody believes that fire has a deadly force, but is water to extinguish? And still, even still, cannot win over water, wood, earth, or whatever in our life. In that regard, if you believe in that, if you act like water, I'm sure that you will be respected by all the people around you. That's my belief, but it's up to you. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for coming today, and especially to those of you who submitted questions. And I want to thank you for an excellent address and for taking those questions. Kamsahamnida, thank you very much.